Welcome to Liberty Action Alert with Greg Seltz, sponsored by our friends at the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty here in Washington, D.C. A program that cuts through the chaos and confusion in the culture today by talking to kingdom citizenship, bold biblical principles for a robust public Christian life. And now your host, Dr. Greg Seltz.
Good day, Washington, D.C., and friends of the program all across the country. I'm Greg Seltz. Welcome to the Liberty Action Alert, where every week we try to cut through the noise, take on the issues, especially the public issues that matter to you, people of faith. You know, we try to rely on the wisdom of the Word for the sake of the culture and the mission of the church, or as we like to say here at the LCRL, we're trying to put our temporal liberties to work for the sake of the eternal liberties of God for all. Today we're privileged to have on our program Charles Donovan, the president of the Charlotte Lozier Institute, also associated with the Susan B. Anthony group that we're so proud of and privileged to work with. He served as the legislative director of the National Right to Life Committee for more than 3 decades, worked as a writer for President Reagan, helped lead the Family Research Council, and most recently, besides his work now, was a senior research fellow in religion and civil society at the Heritage Foundation. What a pedigree of service, Chuck. Welcome.
Well, it's been a pedigree of opportunity, Greg. Met some great people in Washington, D.C., and came here on behalf of the life issue, actually, originally, which explains my first stop at National Right to Life Committee, but have gravitated over the years to all the other issues affected by life, which include family, community, private sector, so that we have communities that thrive and don't depend on external conditions, if you will.
Okay. Well, honest, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Also on the program, Tim Goeglein from Focus on the Family, good friend of the LCRL, Vice President of Government Affairs. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you so much, Greg. It's great to be with you.
Okay. When we get to this issue, Chuck, I want to start with you. Roe, this article that came out, and again, the abortion distortion, that's a kind of a technical term because Sandra Day O'Connor, Supreme Court Justice O'Connor, she actually titled the Roe decision as the abortion distortion. And so there's several articles about it, but John Stonestreet and Shane Morris at breakpoint.org, they actually wrote this article that I want to talk about today, at least some of the points that it makes, and how Roe poisoned the American culture in this whole debate. And it actually, I think that the Supreme Court, when it ruled in favor of Dobbs, it took away the veneer of respectability of abortion. But he goes further than that. I mean, he actually says, no, it's poisoned our politics, it's poisoned our dialogue, it's poisoned our culture. You've been a part of this debate for a long time. So how do you see it?
Well, I see it as probably the first major impact in society on polarization. I get a little nostalgic because I was coming of age, literally, and also in terms of thinking about the world and politics in the decade before Roe. We didn't have an easy society in the 1960s.
Right.
With the decade of assassination, contention over civil rights, the decade collapsed into the Vietnam War, Summer of Love, 1968, I believe, if I have my terms right, Woodstock, drugs beginning to flood the market. So I would say the seeds of all sorts of things were present. But there was still, I think, a broad consensus in society that politics was about, decisions about, caring for the weakest among us. Obviously debates about war and peace. But people didn't really incorporate violence into their sense of how communities and disputes should be organized and settled. And I think what Roe introduced into our society in a absurdly broad decision in Roe v. Wade was that we can basically solve our problems by trying controlled violence. And the laws of all 50 states were swept away overnight. And suddenly, this was a radical change. It was an overnight change. And all of a sudden, I think our society got used to convulsions like this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, controlled violence, when you start to think that is not a useful way to actually solve these major issues among ourselves. Well, Tim, my issue with all this stuff is we represent the church's voice, obviously, in Washington to a great degree. The church is supposed to be God's moral voice in culture for the sake of the culture, as well as the unique voice of proclaiming the good news of the gospel. I get that. But have we lost our way on this civil work that God would have us do, even for the sake of our mission? Because I remember the founding fathers saying something like, there can be no just, no good law that defies God's 10 commandments. So, have we lost our way on this? And how do you think that has happened? Has Roe been a part of that?
Well, I do think that overwhelmingly that the church has articulated this remarkable and consistent pro-life message from the beginning, always consistent with and rooted in the natural law. And so I feel quite comfortable, and I know that all of us at Focus on the Family feel very comfortable that the promotion of righteousness and justice in the public square is very consistent with everything that we learn in both the Old and the New Testaments, and that you don't have to be a Christian or a Jew to understand that there is a moral sense deeply rooted in the questions of the public square. And the wonderful thing that the Lozier Institute and the Susan B. Anthony list have done with such consistency, beginning with Chuck Donovan, who is really one of our most important public intellectuals on the question of pro-life, is that they have always, with no exception, literally none, always articulated the pro-life message in a civil, magnanimous, graceful way, but, and this gets to the heart of your question, if I may, Greg, but unapologetically. And unlike many of their public policy opponents, not enemies, but opponents, they have always taken the high ground. And I think it's in no small measure because of that, consistent with righteousness and justice, that we are today celebrating this remarkable victory in the Supreme Court. It takes a while.
Yeah, remarkable it is. Now, also in the article, again, Stone Street quotes Ryan Anderson and Alexander DeSanctis in their book, Tearing Us Apart. And I want to read one of the things that he brought up in this article from that book. He talked about how Roe is a heavy-handed intervention, corrupting our political process, undermining the will of the voters, and fostering a mentality among progressives that whatever they couldn't win in legislatures, they could demand from the courts. And I guess, turning back to you, Chuck, is there an intimidation to that? And do you think that that's also part of what's kind of infected our dialogue? How can we engage with a group that says, well, if we lose there, we'll play unfair and go here? And how do we engage that? Are we prepared? So maintaining the high ground, obviously, but realizing that this is in many ways a battle that we can't afford to lose for a civil society.
Well, Greg, it begins with whether or not in civil society we work largely through representative institutions or through unelected bodies.
Okay.
The American experiment, whatever you think about the foundation or the sources of law, is unquestionably a representative, what they call a democratic republic. It depends on decisions the people make, and then they largely delegate powers. The Constitution sets out where the powers are to be delegated, but however you look at it again, there's meant to be a balance and a check and balance on powers. So the authors of the Federalist Papers said, don't worry so much about the judiciary. It's the least dangerous branch.
Right.
Remember that phrase? I think it's Hamilton's. We all love Hamilton, except when he says things like this. It has neither force nor will. It basically, but judgment is all it has.
Right.
Well, the last 30 years have shown the court as being a political football.
Right.
And in opposing it, you sound like you were a political football too. So we've got a situation where the court in the last few decades has changed the definition of marriage, discovered that certain sexual revolutionary practices are no longer unhealthy, that the states not only must allow things, lately they must promote them or permit them to be promoted. And frankly, it's blocked debate, it's antagonized millions of people, and it's made a sense that we're powerless to change policy by the ordinary means, which is persuasion and election. And you end up with whoever's got the most sway. So we see the court come down in Dobbs, and immediately the justices find their homes stalked. It's a terrifying prospect.
Because it's unseemly. There's no doubt about it.
And Greg, may I pick up on Chuck's excellent point for just a moment?
Right.
Abraham Lincoln said that the very definition of a hypocrite is somebody who murders his parents and then claims to be an orphan, right? We have listened to the progressive living constitutionalists, in various forms over the last half century, tell us that it was the force of law and the power of the Supreme Court and the courts that were definitive in this question, until of a sudden we have a Supreme Court that has become comprised of constitutionalists, people who actually believe that the words in the text have a fixed meaning, right? And then of a sudden we have this remarkable culture changing victory in the Supreme Court, and the next thing we hear is that the Supreme Court is illegitimate, that we have to pack the court, that maybe we should expand the court. So what? So that the progressives may kind of end up with the arithmetic that would ultimately give them a victory on this issue and on others. And not to mix and match, but when Martin Luther said that history is like a drunk man on a horse, right? No sooner does he fall off on the left side, does he mount again and fall off on the right. Chuck makes an excellent point. The Constitution is the North Star. And Justice Alito brilliantly said, it's not in the Constitution. It's not even in the best of our tradition or history in the United States.
Well, and Tim, I'd like to go further than that with you too, and just say, I think what we have now is this idea that process is morality. And I was a little disappointed with the Dobbs ruling in that it almost, again, made it sound like, well, this is just a generic thing. Constitution doesn't have it, so therefore it goes back to the states. Again, there's no hint of the immorality of the activity whatsoever. And so, I think sometimes that's where God-fearing folks who want to just live in peace among other people think, well, it still sounds like it's a neutral issue. I don't like it. I think it's wrong. No, there is a perspective underlying this where your individual worth is either dependent on your relationship to your value to society or your relationship to your value to God. And so you either have inherent dignity and it needs to be protected by a legitimate civil state, or all hell breaks loose and whoever's in power gets to decide what you're worth. And shouldn't that be where the church starts to focus its attention? Because we can even make the argument that we're fighting for those we disagree with. What do you think?
Yes, their answer is we can definitively make that case. And I think the church has, in fact, effectively made that case in the public square. Back to Lincoln for a moment, not to mix and match, but I think it's important. He was a very successful litigator and a train attorney, and he finds himself in a very small town in Illinois, in one of the beautiful courthouses that kind of define the Midwest. And he learns about the Kansas-Nebraska Act and the idea of popular sovereignty. This idea that somehow we're going to root America's, bellwether policy, that if Kansas says that slavery is okay and Nebraska says it isn't, that somehow that will be the new definition. And on these questions, I think, and I would be very interested in yours and Chuck's perspective, I think as constitutionalists, we have to be very pleased with Dobbs indeed, but we have to understand that we view, abortion as wrong both in Kansas and in Nebraska. And I think it's maybe a bit of providential humor that the first ballot initiative that we've had to put up with is actually, in Kansas. This should not in any way hit our morale. We're at the beginning of another process. And we as pro-life people will learn from Kansas and we'll build from there.
Yeah, in fact, I just saw that, when you think about it, and I met with a lot of the people in Kansas. We've got a big contingent in the legislature out there, and I met in their homes about a month ago. And they were, doing everything they could to make sure that their state didn't become basically the New York of the Midwest or the California of the Midwest, and that was not to be. And surely a lot of church people must have voted to protect abortion. And I think, and I pray that they did it because they didn't really know what they were voting for, because they literally have opened themselves up to the infanticide bills of New York and California as well. And so I turn it back to you, Chuck. I know you've said this. You said that Dobbs is just the beginning of the pro-life work. And so kind of flesh that out a little bit. I think I read that you said that just a time or two. What do you mean by that?
Well, our opponents indicated that this was going to be a summer of rage, and I commented online that I thought it would be more likely a summer of service. Okay. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing. I'm releasing an op-ed in the next day or two, detailing what a whole host of states are doing to expanding their services and support for mothers and babies. And not surprisingly, at least for me, the vast majority of these states are the ones the left is criticizing. Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, which has just created a tax credit that parents will be able to claim for their unborn child. It's a child tax credit that begins at the beginning. Texas has a big new program. So, pardon me, we're seeing a lot happening. States are filling in behind where there are needs. And, we've gotten used to the fact that abortion exists and supposedly it's claimed by poor women. It should trouble our conscience more that women feel they don't have a choice. We produced some research that shows about 60% of women are having what we call unwanted abortions. Wow. It's not that the child is unwanted. It's just that all things being equal, they don't feel up to the task. So we need all sorts of changes, including in how men view sexuality, because I think that's the poison pill number one. That the Roe v. Wade and the fosters, things that has fostered, have produced in men a diminution of character.
I make that argument a lot too. I say that abortion is the most pro-chauvinist attack on women there can be, because you're saying to a guy, and again, we're trying to raise men who take up their responsibility. You're saying to a guy, here's $200, that's it. That's your extent of your relationship to this question. And there's even some people, I've even seen this on some of these blogs, where men are saying, look, if you have the right to choose to have the baby, I have the right to choose whether I want to raise that baby or be a part of that baby's life. Well, you start to think about what kind of men and women are we creating here, who look at that baby and say, you know what, I don't want you. If I feel like killing you, that's fine. And if I do have you, he's probably going to abandon you, and we all feel good about ourselves. There's got to be a different way to go about these things. Tim, what is next on this kind of stuff? The church's voice is a pro-woman, pro-family, pro-man, husband voice. That's not necessarily what the culture wants, is it?
It very often is not. And, it's very important that we, with humility, bring light to the darkness and to continue to articulate the beauty and the value of marriage, family, and parenting. I'm sure, many people who are listening have been following a very interesting debate, actually, in the Wall Street Journal, rooted in the phrase wanted or unwanted children. This, I think, goes to the heart of the point that Chuck was making and the one that you articulate so well. We have to continue to articulate the value and the blessing and the gift of children, both of those who are, in air quotation marks, planned and those who are not. I mean, this points up the really oxymoronic phrase Planned Parenthood, to the largest purveyors of abortion, Inc. And I think we'll just have to continue. I really am. I'm a bottomless optimist on this question. I really am. No, because Chuck said a moment ago, Florida, Georgia, West Virginia, Indiana. It's contested ground, but we're going to have substantial pro-life victories, and we're just going to keep going.
And I think that's, and so gather your thoughts for a final thought, but I think that's where we have to go with this, because I even just saw that in the national politics that the Republicans were putting forth a bill that was going to incentivize family. It was going to protect family. It was going to incentivize keeping men in the home, or at least giving men the idea that staying in the home is what they need to do. And obviously that protects the woman and protects the child, and all of that's good. And I think we've got to start calling out the abortion business. See, we keep personalizing it down to one example, when in reality there's billions of dollars being made by snuffing out children. And that's the kind of thing, when you start to think about this, and you're talking about 95% of all abortions are elective, and there's really, they're just the choice of another to say, I don't want this baby in my life or in our life. And there's a business, a corporate business behind all that. There's big money involved in that. There's even an anti-family notion to all of that, which keeps men and women working, to the big corporations rather than tending to their families. We've got to kind of get involved in all of these discussions. So, Chuck, final word for you. Where do we go next with this? And are you? Tim's always optimistic. I got to tell you, he's always optimistic, but that's because he knows God is at work. So we know that. What are some of the things where we've got to roll up our sleeves?
Well, after Kansas, I think we have to realize we're going to have some losses. A wise commander studies his defeats, also occasionally makes a retreat. I don't think we'll have an option to make a retreat, but we need to find out what happened to us, whether it was linguistic, or people's understanding of a particular issue and how we framed it. We're going to learn along the way. But what's happened with post-Dobbs is all sorts of people have had to come out of the woodwork. Corporations, politicians. Prior to that, everybody could say they're pro-life or the other position, knowing the court was going to clean up and strike down whatever we were up to. Now people are going to have to be accountable for their positions. And I think we've come to a day where there's a referendum on reality. Is the baby real? Will we protect that baby? Will we support the mom? And we'll find out who's in and who's out. And that's the way democracy should work.
Absolutely. Tim, final thoughts?
Yeah, George Orwell said that the first duty of an intelligent person is to restate the obvious. And I think we are now only in the first chapter of the post-Roe era. And so what do we need to do? We need to do what the Charlotte Lozier Institute does, what Susan B. Anthony does, what Focus on the Family does, what the Lutheran Center does. We have to go tell a brand new generation, right, about the beauty and the glory of life. Pope John Paul II, famously, the culture of life, exactly, versus what? The culture of death. Right. We have to go introduce in the battle of ideas in the public square, winsomely but convincingly. We have to persuade, and we're not going to do it in the toxic atmosphere that we're in by putting our knuckle in anybody's chests. Right. And we can't overwhelm people with facts. These are hard things, but I believe we can shape public sentiment and create a new chapter for America as a pro-life nation. We got big work to do. So here we go.
I love that. Thank you both. Removing the veneer of respectability, I think that was helpful. That's what I think the Supreme Court finally did. Now we actually have to look at what abortion is and what it isn't, and what family is, what the child is, why that's also important to us as a people. And I think that's upon us, and what a great day that is. So thanks, Chuck, for being with us, and thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks for tuning in today. To get to know our LCRLDC work better, check out our website at lcrlfreedom.org. Contained there are resources to empower your public square dynamic discipleship. Or check out our weekly Word from the Center opinion piece every Friday at facebook.com/LCRL Freedom. Till next time, God bless you always. I'm Greg Seltz. Have a great week.
You've been listening to Liberty Action Alert with Greg Seltz, Executive Director of the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty in Washington, D.C. This program has been brought to you by the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty.